So for this one, I kind of did just make a presentation. Like it's not really based off of a book, but it is based off of a talk by Josh Tenenbaum, as well as two essays that I've previously written, and just some knowledge that I've compiled to sort of talk about how is it that the human mind as a computational system differs from artificial intelligence. Okay, so considering the mind as computation. So a quick question, what does it mean to think? It has something to do with information processing, bias, whatever. How can we codify thought and create systems that think and act like us? That's something that Josh Tenenbaum targets a lot. So he's a computational neuroscientist, and he studies how is it that humans think, and then how can systems be codified to think like humans. Yes. So that's a really good question to just keep in the back of your head. What does it even mean to think? Because we're going to reference thought and intelligence a lot, right? So what kind of computation is cognition as posed by Tenenbaum? He also asks, what is a meaningful answer to this question, and how do we even know that we have a meaningful answer to the question? He suggests a reverse engineering approach where he says, if we can create machines that behave like a person, and we can infer maybe that it is processing or thinking like one. So this is computational neuroscience, or at least an aspect of it. It involves modeling natural intelligence or the mind through AI, and it involved using quantitative and qualitative data to suggest, to create it involves creating models and using quantitative and qualitative data to compare them to human thought, right? So you want quantitative and qualitative data in order to, appropriately compare it and say, okay, is this thing behaving like a person? Well, then maybe it's thinking like one. And, Tenenbaum cites an example that I've pulled up later where, someone developed, a visual processing system. And by using the visual processing system, they could predict how the human brain would process similar data. So artificial intelligence. John McCarty, I believe in the 1950s, famously defined it as machines that are capable of performing tasks that we define as intelligent, such as reasoning, learning, planning, problem solving. And of course, it's just kind of like a weird definition that doesn't really go far, right? Because it's like, oh, well, artificial intelligence is anything that we would consider intelligent, right? But just done by machines. So it's a weird, it's a practical definition, but it doesn't really get at what is intelligence even, but it doesn't really matter, right? As long as you can recognize it as intelligent, you can then say it's artificially intelligent as a sort of distinction from just natural intelligence. So currently, AI can outperform or match us in many intelligent tasks. So in a previous essay, I've cited that AI has famously beat people in Jeopardy. It's beat people in the board game Go, which I believe is a Korean board game. It beat someone in chess. It's beaten many people in chess, but the first example was very, very famous, of course, and considered a big hallmark in the history of AI, I believe. AI have also been able to do successful object and scene recognition, right? Especially at a two-dimensional level. However, this is complicated once you start to consider, basically the infinite number of ways you can perceive a three-dimensional object, right? Because you can rotate a three-dimensional object, you can see it from all these different perspectives, and you can also see it from different distances, right? And that in turn changes the object size on your visual input, right? AI have also been used for image-related medical diagnosis, for example, on MRI. I've also seen AI systems like robotics being able to, successfully do surgery on pig abdomen, right, at a comparable level as actual surgeons. Some interesting stuff that I wrote about in a previous essay was their ability to predict pain phenotypes. So a group of researchers used an AI system to, take about 30 alleles. Do you guys know what allele means? Not to sound condescending.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, so they used 30 alleles on 10 genes, to predict severe pain phenotypes. So these people who had extremely high or low thresholds to hot, cold, mechanical, or electrical noxious stimuli. Noxious just means anything which should produce a pain feeling or will lead to such a feeling. So this means that these people were able to withstand a lot or very little hot, cold, mechanical, so like pressure or electricity. Another interesting they did was another group of researchers used AI to predict moderate to severe postoperative pain, right? And with a 78% classification success rate for the day following the surgery, right? This indicates that, okay, maybe these kinds of models will be very useful in predicting who may need a pre-analgesic, right? So an analgesic is just a drug to, reduce the effects of pain. So like Tylenol, morphine, so on and so on, right? All those kinds of drugs that deal with pain. They're suggesting that you could improve this model, so get it up above 78%, right? And then you could give people pre-analgesics, so that way it reduces their likelihood of having moderate to severe postoperative pain, right? So you're not just talking about a little bit of pain, but you're talking about quite a bit. Importantly, they need to up the classification rate, right? Because you don't want to give people pre-analgesics, especially in a country like America, where they're going to have to pay for it if they don't need it. But also, there are complications, right? Like it can thin your blood and make surgery slightly more dangerous, right? So it is important to have the classification rate improved, but still 78% is pretty impressive. It's also been able to predict like artificial intelligence has been able to predict pain in the moment using biosignals, so electromyographic signals, electrocardiographic, and skin conductance level. Do those biosignals mean anything to you guys, or do you guys familiar with these? Or electromyographical
Yeah.
is basically a measure of your muscle tension, right? And so this can be an indicator of stress or arousal or whatever. Electrocardiographic, well, that's just heart rate, right? And then there's skin conductance, which is basically like you always have a skin conductance because you're always sweating to some degree. And this is going to change. And it's going to change in a way that we can't observe with our own eyes and hands and whatever, but a machine can detect this difference in how much we're sweating at a very small level, right? And yeah, so using these three signals combined, they were predicting pain such that they could say whether or not someone was actively feeling pain in response to the stimuli they were applying. Okay, so artificial intelligence versus natural intelligence. So artificial intelligence has very high information processing speed, right? And can process data very quickly relative to humans. However, there's no such thing as artificial intelligence being open-ended yet or general intelligence, right? So unlike humans, they can't just do a lot of different tasks, right? They're very, very specific in the kinds of information they can process, how they can process it, the kinds of output they can produce, right? Also, AI are very slow learners, right? Like humans, sure, like our system is built with bias of millions of years of evolution and maybe 20 years of learning experience, whatever. But like still, like if I show you, this and you've never seen this before, and I tell you this is an iPhone, right? You're probably going to recognize that iPhone maybe every single time you see it thereafter. However, if I show the AI, 1,000 images of this phone, I might still possibly trick it and be like, show it a picture of a car at the same size on its, pixels and just be like, okay, what is this? And it might say an iPhone, right? Or something else of a similar shape. So we're very fast learners and we're very open-ended, generally intelligent things that can process a lot of different information in different ways, creatively, right? So Tenenbaum cites that there's been $100 billion pumped into automated driving alone already, and these things may not be ready for full use within a few decades still, right? So like very slow learners, right? Whereas like we can learn to drive a car in a couple years maybe. That is like learning all the rules and how to process all the perceptual, cues and actually learning the motor skills to drive, right? Okay. What are these? Does anyone know?
I know, like scientifically.
What's that? I don't know. I thought this would be funny. I was hoping to get people to guess what these are. You guys know?
They seem like neurons to me.
Neurons, yeah. I thought they kind of looked like monsters, so I thought I'd put a funny little thing there. But yeah, they're neurons, right? They're various kinds of neurons. You can see my mouse. You typically learn about a neuron in this kind of shape, right? But in reality, neurons are often very complex and have about 10,000 synapses to other neurons on average. That's an average, but like still very, very complex. So our units of computation, thought to be the neuron, that's the primary unit. So as I said, the number of synapses per neuron is often 10,000. Neurons per the brain is estimated to be about 1 billion in a human. Neurons and synapses at birth are interestingly all there. At least like most of your neurons are there. Like the far, far majority of your neurons are all there. You were typically born with more synapses, and you do this thing called synaptic pruning, where you just eliminate a bunch, and this kind of makes your neural networks more efficient. And I noted that you have most of your neurons at birth, the exception being in your hippocampus. You do grow neurons in your hippocampus every day. Do you guys know what the hippocampus does? It's an area primarily dedicated to like memory, learning, sometimes spatial information processing, things like that. But of course, you can give it a couple words, but that doesn't do justice how complex the brain is organized, and often how different parts of the brain can work on a task that you would never imagine it to, right? Okay, the action potential. So basically, there's a certain threshold that needs to be met for a neuron, and this relates to like how many neurotransmitters carrying these sort of charges, influencing the charge of the neuron, right? And once you get a certain amount of neurotransmitters affecting the charge, positive or negative, to meet this threshold, which is different at different neurons, but once it reaches its threshold, it basically fires, right? And so this is representing a quick change in the electrical gradient, right? Such that you get a rush of positive charges into the neuron, right? So Gentina Toxopius, she used an example of, a neuron is like a banana in a glass of salty milk, right? And so whereas at rest, the neuron has a lot of potassium in it, and outside of the neuron, you have a lot of calcium and sodium. A lot of that sodium will rush into the neuron, creating that positive. Once you get the threshold, these sodium channels will open, a bunch of sodium rushes in, and then you get, a positive neuron, and this allows it to send a signal and fire, and then send other neurotransmitters to other neurons, and then you have, communication, right? And actual information processing. And here's the artificial neural network, right? And so by comparison, you have your layers of input, right? And you could consider that in the human nervous system, where it's like on the retina, for example, or maybe deep within the brain, you have input into the system, and this can all be mathematically represented and whatever. And then this thing is going to fire, and it's going to send a certain amount of, again, you could represent it as math, and then this thing has a sort of threshold, and you say, okay, like, for example, this could send a 1 or a 2, and this has a threshold of 3, and then this thing sends maybe this sends a 1, maybe this sends a 2, maybe this sends a -2, and so this doesn't reach its threshold, and it doesn't fire. But let's say, the threshold is 3 here, so this sends a 1, this sends a 1, and this sends a 1. Those all summate, and then this thing fires, and then this, can fire at, I don't know, maybe we'll say it sends a 2 to this neuron, right? And maybe the threshold of this neuron is like 16 or something. And so, a bunch of these neurons need to summate to get 16 and make that fire. And then that thing is going to fire at a particular rate corresponding to whatever these are making it fire, and fire at the output. And this gives you whatever, your output is, right? Maybe it's a motor response, maybe it's a thought, maybe it's a certain kind of perception, right? And importantly, like all of these things are working together. There is bidirectional causality, such that these things do go back and influence these ones, right? In fact, in like the visual tract, there's more pathways going backwards than there are forward, which is another interesting fact. And then so this sort of pattern of communication becomes refined with respect to the output, such that maybe you need an output you could say like it's represented by like 25 or something, and this thing gives you like a 27, and then it can like maybe you refine it. So this is the process of learning. You say no, I need 25, and so it gives you basically, or you say that's wrong or something, and so it goes like, okay, what about 26.5? And you say, well, that's wrong, and then it goes like, what about 26? And it gets closer and closer and approximates 25. And of course that, you think of motor learning, maybe like learning how to skate or something, or learning how to swim, right? Like you're refining motor movements, and that would be these outputs represented across many, many neural networks. And of course, neural networks can be incredibly complex, and even these alone may not do justice to how complex the brain is, or even things that humans have actually made, right? So these things become incredibly complex. And again, with something like 100 billion neurons in a system with 10,000 connections per neuron, right? Like, you can get very complex neural networks within the brain. So again, Tenenbaum talks about this reverse engineering process, right? Making models to understand the brain. And he talks about this group of researchers who created a visual model based off of, visual processing neurons in the brain. And using this model, they could predict how actual brain neurons would respond to visual information. And of course, this is really amazing. Similar approaches have been done outside of AI. Like there's this method called MVPCA, multivoxel pattern analysis, so MVPA, and you basically look at like a pixel by pixel level on brain imaging, like how is a part of the brain responding to a certain kind of stimuli, and then you can predict, later how will that pixel respond to some other kind of stimuli, right? So maybe it's just like, different visual images, maybe it's different sounds, whatever. So the gap between AI and NI. So Tenenbaum says, well, natural intelligence is not just function approximation and pattern recognition with these neural networks, right? As the neural network we just saw, right? It's like, okay, just a bunch of kind of, it's essentially recognizing a pattern, right? So you can have a bunch of different inputs, and then the system gets refined. So it refines the output and all those intermediary processing units to the input, right? So it's a relationship between those two. And then that's essentially like a recognition of pattern, right? So you're basically responding a correct output to a particular input, and then you're recognizing a pattern across a sequence of inputs. So one way to think of this, well, it's not just pattern recognition, right? Is there's a famous thought example, the Chinese room, right? And so maybe I develop an AI, or sorry, I give an English speaker a book of rules for how to respond to like all the different possible, sequences of like letters and spaces in the Chinese language, right? Mandarin. Maybe I give them a rule book. And so, there's a Chinese person giving slots to this guy. So he's just sending him letters. And then this English guy is responding using the rule book, right? And he's giving the correct responses to this guy. So from the actual Chinese man who's sending him letters, the Chinese man has a very good reason to think that this Englishman knows Chinese. In actuality, the Englishman doesn't know anything about Chinese. He just understands how to follow a rule book. And this is kind of the same comparison to how artificial neural networks work, is it's just pattern recognition, just recognizing patterns and responding accordingly. And of course, this Chinese room thought experiment is a response to the Turing test, right? Where you say, okay, maybe if the AI is responding like a human would, then maybe it's thinking like a human would. And the Chinese room is supposed to make us think, well, no, actually, this is not the case. It's just pattern recognition. So natural intelligence is, it's different than this pattern recognition and just function approximation. It's explaining and understanding. It's imagining things that we could see but haven't yet. It's planning actions and solving problems to make these things real. It's building new models as we learn about the world. And Tenenbaum says, well, this is what real intelligence is. And he says, how do we turn this into AI, right? How do we encode this into a system that we want to do whatever we need? Tenenbaum also talks about, well, the foundation of human thought is this thing called core knowledge, right? That Elizabeth Spelke, a psychologist, studies a lot in infants, right? This idea that we have this foundational understanding of physics and materials and substances and how those things interact. We have this fundamental understanding of human psychology, right? So agents that act on the world, we kind of can approximate or get an idea, project onto them what their desires and beliefs and plans, right? So what their behavior might be. And we understand some interaction between the physical world and the agents within it. And Spelke calls these intuitive theories, and Tenenbaum says basically these theories are essential if we want to AI to become naturally intelligent systems, or things that are, more similar to them, or really thinking like humans. So yeah, our foundation is built in intimacy. It's shared somewhat with other species. It's extended and enriched in humans, and it's carried out by functionally distinct brain systems. All of this is cited by Tenenbaum. This foundational understanding of physics and substances and psychology allows us to connect the perception of the world, right, like just pure sensation and whatever kind of processing, to language and abstract reasoning, and then motor outputs and action planning. So again, Tenenbaum poses, how do we capture these kinds of things in AI computation? And that's essentially his whole research mission, as I understand it. He compares our foundational system to a game engine with its sort of approximation of physics, and how like a a solid substance might respond differently than a liquid substance, or a rigid versus non-rigid substance, or dust versus a whole big block of a substance. So this kind of system in the game engine approximates physics similarly to how we might in our own head. And of course, that's very different from actual physics, and how like it might really play out. But we have a decent approximation, and we can take decent guesses. And then through these decent guesses, we can both understand perceptually like what is actually happening around us, and then we can action plan and figure out how we're going to act on the world, and also project how might others act on that world. And again, the game engine also has, an understanding of what intelligent behavior looks like, and it encodes these into its like little robots that might like fight you in Call of Duty or whatever, right? It makes the behavior look intelligent, and he compares this to how we might understand psychology in others. He shows the Heider and Simmel movie from 1944. It's just a little clip, and he gives us this as an example. And it's a very famous clip, and it gives a great example of how humans extrapolate a lot of information beyond what is shown. So I'm going to show you guys this, and you guys just let me know what comes to mind. What information are you extrapolating here? Okay, what do you guys get from this video? Or what happened?
Shapes are just moving in and out of the dustbin or trash can, I guess. I don't know what that is.
Yeah, okay. Simon, anything to you?
like it kind of seems like there's a relationship between the different shapes.
Yeah. What
Like
kind of
almost like, or sorry, I was just gonna say like when one of them was bouncing against the wall, it seemed like it was trying to help the other shape get in the trash bin, and yet, and then like when they went to the outside, it seemed like the larger triangle was trying to chase them. So I don't know, maybe like a relationship between them.
Yeah, like a social relationship, maybe like the little circle and the little triangle are like, they're like allies. And then the big triangle maybe doesn't seem too nice, but also maybe that's like his trash bin or home or whatever. So we're interpreting a lot of social relationships here, right? We might also like interpret a sort of power, right? Like we might say like this big triangle might be like more powerful than these two because it's bigger, right? Um, we're also interpreting like these three things are agents. Even though like we've never seen anything maybe like this behave in an intelligent way before, for some reason we're interpreting these things as agents with a sort of will and desires, right? Like for some reason these things desired to get in here, he desired to keep them out. Maybe this was his space, his property. We imagine maybe that this is a rigid structure and it's not like a fluid one that's like mushy and it's not like a gel. Like this looks like a pretty solid structure to us. So there's a lot we've extrapolated, right? That's just not it's not explicitly stated anywhere. There's just a lot of assumptions in how we process this little video. Tenenbaum notes a lot of assumptions and information we've made. So he's got some extrapolations based on the physical objects and constraints. So he suggests that, well, we've interpreted what is solid, what is fixed, what is movable, like this door, what is locked. We've interpreted events and causal interactions. So we've interpreted collision, pushing, shoving, right? Like we've interpreted these things as acting on one another in that way. We've interpreted helping, hurting, and escaping. We've interpreted relationships, as you noted, Simon, in terms of friendships and enemies. We've even gone on to project emotions, fear, anger, relief. And we've even given a moral judgment. Like, who's your favorite out of these? If you were to put these into two groups, right? Like, you kind of go, okay, maybe these are the good guys, and for some reason that's the bad guy. Yeah, there's a lot of extrapolation that happened there for very, very little information, which is quite amazing. And he suggests that we use this core knowledge to extrapolate a lot of information, and this is what's missing in AI. And he suggests that to be able to get this, modeling the core common sense, he says that we need symbolic languages to be able to represent and reason about abstract knowledge. And we need to use probabilistic Bayesian inference to reason about unobserved causes from sparse, uncertain data, which is really what we just did, right? Like we just reasoned about all kinds of causes, all kinds of relationships in relation to the outcomes of the events that we actually saw. And then lastly, he says, we use the neural networks for the pattern recognition and function approximation and to make these things, run smoothly and whatever. But yeah, that's my understanding of Tenenbaum and this kind of stuff he has to say about the mind as computation. Yeah. Thank you, guys.
That was good.
Thank you. I feel like certainly didn't do that justice, but yeah, I mean, you'd probably take a lot of interest in it in Moise. You probably understand it a lot better than I did because he definitely takes like a heavy, or what seems like a heavy engineering approach, in my opinion. Olivier, how long have you been here?
I've been here for a little bit now.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Cool.
I tried sending something, but I don't know if it actually sent.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about like not coming with anything prepared. There's like every week there's a speaker schedule, so like there's designated speakers in their time slots. I think you accepted the invite, right?
Yeah, is there like a list for when the speakers go?
Yeah. So basically, like you click on the reading club in your calendar, and then like if you're on your phone, it should say like sign up for presenter slot. So I just click that, and then at the top here, it says like sign up for a presenter slot here, and you click that. Yeah, and then you can see the speaker list as it is for this summer. Sorry, you can't really see it from my phone, but and then if you want to like sign up yourself or whatever, which I would love for you to do, I think they're really cool. You know, I don't know how to do it on my phone personally, but you can just do it from your laptop, click on it, and like type in your name and presentation idea. Yeah. Anyways,
Yeah,
it's good.
sure.
There's not a lot of people here tonight. It seems like everyone's pretty busy. Ahmed's in Winnipeg at a conference, and Emily's busy, and Evan's on vacation, so a lot of people gone. And I think Hannah just forgot about tonight. But anyways, does anyone have any?
Where's Evan right now?
What's up?
Where's Evan right now?
I think he's still in Barbados for some time. I don't really know how long. I think he's just gonna like. He definitely texted me something that I think like mid-June he's gonna be back in Canada, maybe even Calgary. I think mid-June he's gonna be in Calgary.
Interesting. Yeah, long vacation maybe before he starts work.
What did you say?
Long vacation before he starts work.
Yeah, I mean, you know, he worked the CLC thing and saved up a lot of money this year, so he just, you know, spent it. Yeah. He sent me a lot of cool videos from like a submarine and like a cave. He went swimming in a cave. That was pretty cool.